Good evening and welcome to Smack Productions Live. I am your host, Michelle Campbell, for the evening. Thank you for joining me tonight. We have an exciting show in store for you. Tonight, I have with me four distinguished men who are members of the National Society, Sons of the American Revolution, or you may hear me call it SAR. Like last month's show, my guests there were from the Daughters of the American Revolution, and I talked about how challenging it was to join that organization. Well, this organization, SAR, is equally as difficult to join as well. And tonight we will hear from four distinguished men who will tell us about their journey. A little bit about the SAR. So, the National Society Sons of the American Revolution was founded in 1889 and is headquartered in Louisville, Kentucky. SAR is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to promoting patriotism, preserving American history, and promoting education for our future generations. As the largest male genealogical society in the country, SAR boasts tens of thousands of active members of over 550 chapters across the United States and internationally. Any man 18 years or older, regardless of age, race, religion, or ethnic background, who can prove blood lineal descent from a patriot of the American Revolution is eligible for membership. I should correct that. I did say age. Yes, you have to be at least 18, just to correct that. It is not known how many African American men are members of the SAR, but I can tell you there's not many. Tonight, we have the honor of having four Black SAR members on the show. And let me take a moment to introduce you to them. Dean Henry was born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and still resides in the area. He began researching his family genealogy in the late 1980s. Since retiring from a career in information technology in 2013, he has consulted as a professional genealogist and cybersecurity leader. He established Family Pearl LLC in 2012, which specializes in focusing on African American genealogy and genealogy technology. Dean's current volunteer activities include Board of Directors, members for the Genealogical Society of Pennsylvania, Executive Committee member for the African American Genealogy Group of Philadelphia, Board of Management member for the Philadelphia Continental Chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, and Auditor General for the Society of the First African Families of English America. He is a member and past treasurer for the Greater Philadelphia Area Chapter of the Association of Professional Genealogists and is a member of the Family Quest Society chapter of the Afro American Historical and Genealogical Society and the Sons and Daughters of the U.S. Middle Passage. Dean earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania and a master's degree from LaSalle University. He is an alumni chapter member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Thank you and welcome to the show, Dean.
Thanks for having me.
Next, we have up Rick Murphy. He is an acclaimed historian, scholar, educator, documentarian, and lecturer. He has presented throughout North America, Europe, and Africa. As an award winning author, he explores the rich tapestry of African American history by weaving together the personal and heroic stories of amazing men and women and their rich and remarkable contributions to American history. Widely known for his social justice work and his research in American history, his publications include The Arrival of the First Africans in Virginia in 1619, Section 27, and Freedmen's Village in Arlington National Cemetery, The African American History of America's Most Hallowed Ground, the biography of Rear Admiral Larry Chambers, USN, first African American to command an aircraft carrier, and Freedom Road, an American family saga from Jamestown to World War. He is currently working on a manuscript, Liberty, The Legacy of 1776 and Cuffy's Lane, expected to be released in the summer of 2022, so this summer, and the 13th Amendment. Rick has received over 100 awards and commendations, including some of his most recent, which include the National Geological Society Presidential Citation and the Frederick Douglass Service Award, both in 2020. Rick currently serves as the President General of the Society of the First African Families of English Americans and was the former National Vice President for the Afro American Historical and Genealogical Society. His family lineage dates to the earliest colonial periods of Jamestown, Virginia, and Plymouth, Massachusetts, and he has been evaluated and accepted by several hereditary societies. Mr. Murphy was a resident fellow at Harvard University Kennedy School, earned a master's from Boston University and a bachelor's from the University of Massachusetts. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Thank you, my honor.
Next up, we have Calvin Ramsey Sr. Was born in Baltimore, Maryland, and grew up in Roxborough, North Carolina, having lived in Atlanta, Georgia, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, Santa Monica, California, Oaks Bluff, Massachusetts, and St. Croix and St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands. He now divides his time between New York City and Sarasota, Florida. Ramsey studied at UCLA. Calvin is an accomplished playwright and book author, having written and produced the musical Bricktop and the theatrical dramas Ruth and The Green Book, the picture book inspiration for the Academy Award winning film The Green Book. Calvin's plays have been performed nationwide, including Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, San Francisco, and Hilton Head, South Carolina. Ramsey's photographs have been exhibited in the U.S. Virgin Islands and are included in a private collections around the United States, with a solo exhibition in the June Kelly Gallery in New York City. Throughout the varied sequences of his career, Ramsey received the Jane Addams Award for Ruth, The Green Book, and Belle, The Last Mule in Gee's Bend, and Bank Street College Best Book Award, Texas Bluebonnet Award, Forward Magazine Best Book Award, ALA Notable Book Award, and the Star Review School Library Journal Award. Ramsey was a recipient of the Distinguished Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major for Justice Award. Ramsey is a member of the National Arts Club, New York, Sons of the American Revolution, and a former trustee at the Bronx Museum of Art in New York. Welcome to the show. Please, I mean, wow, that Green Book, we got to talk a little bit more about that, Calvin. Welcome to the show. Next
Thank
and
you.
last but not least, we have Bill Ritchie. He is a native of Beckley, West Virginia, and educated in a segregated elementary and high school system. Upon graduation, he enrolled at Howard University in Washington, D.C. He subsequently earned a track and field scholarship and became the university's first NCAA All American and National Spring Champion, qualifying for the 1968 U.S. Olympic Trials. Upon graduating in 1971 with a BS in physical education, he became a member of the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, achieving the rank of deputy chief and position of chief of detectives prior to his retirement in 1994. Bill is considered a homicide expert and often requested for commentary by both local and national media. Major investigations, including the attempted assassination of former President Ronald Reagan in 1981 and the Air Florida plane crash in 1982. He later established the Office of Descendant Affairs at the Washington Hospital, and handled security management assignments at the Kennedy Center, DC Public Schools, and contracts for the U.S. Armed Forces. He is also an alum of the University of the District of Columbia and George Washington University. He has previously served on the board of directors for the Greater Washington Urban League and the National Kidney Foundation of NCA. Bill began his family history quest utilizing DNA in 2011 with a goal of validating oral family history published in the Virginia Kaleidoscope in 1996. Not only was he able to validate family history using DNA, but also identified a host of distant cousins, one of whom was a former DAR regent who encouraged and introduced Bill to members of the SAR. Bill was inducted into the DC SAR on July 4th, 2016. During the interim, he has successfully proven 16 additional Patriots. Bill was recently elected and installed at the 113th president of the DC SAR, the first African American to be so installed in the 132-year-old history of the organization. Welcome to the show, Bill. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well. As I said before, I am so honored to have all four of you on this show tonight. I don't know if the Smack Nation audience out there is thoroughly impressed, but I certainly am. So I'd like to get right into this panel discussion today because I know you have some interesting things to share with us. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the first question. And the first question is, and anyone can answer it, is why did you choose to join the SAR?
Well, I don't have a problem because initially when the opportunity or the idea came up, I resisted. I had no reason to consider. I had a DNA match. My family had a DNA match with a former regent. And I know Jean is watching right now, so I've got to tell it like it is. Jean is probably about 92 years old now, and we have become very, very close. And she encouraged, in fact, she was the segue to the DC Sons of the American Revolution when I finally said, okay, I will try this. And submitted the application, and I didn't have a clue as to the effort and the requirement to document every entry on that application. And my application was given to a master genealogist, John Sinks, and John may be watching also. And I always said, as a former homicide commander, I could find people under a rock. John can find them under a pebble. And consequently, not only, proving the first Patriot, but John encouraged, he said, well, you have a lot of other Patriots out there, so let's get to work. And as you indicated, I have a total of 17.
Wow. Awesome. Anybody else want to take that question?
Well, for me, it was a little bit different. Growing up in the Boston area, I come from two old families, one old in terms of being in the Boston area going back to the 1600s, African-American, and one coming from the South, also African-American. My New England family, I knew from oral history that I descended from at least 10 men of African descent who served in the Revolutionary War. And because of that, it was just a normal extension for me who liked history to research those men. And it was very easy to research them because Massachusetts kept birth, death, and marriage certificates going all the way back to the 1600s. So it was just a normal extension for me. In addition, my mother had joined the DAR in 1983 and was the first woman, African-American woman, who joined the DAR under an African-American Revolutionary War patriot, and she opened up that line. So it was just a normal extension for my family to join by virtue of the fact that we knew that we descended from so many men. I descend from 6 men of European descent and at least 10 men who fought directly in the Revolutionary War who are of African descent, and another 5 who provided aid and comfort.
Oh, nice. Very good.
My journey was a little bit more haphazard. I was riding out the storm down in with the pandemic down in Sarasota, and I was researching a new book. This woman named Emma Booker. There are 3 schools in Sarasota named after her, and she started the first African American school there. You may remember the second George Bush was in Florida when he heard about 9/11. He was reading a children's book to some kids, and this was the Emma Booker Elementary School in the black section of Sarasota called Newtown. So I was down there and I was researching Emma Booker, and I found her grave site over in Tampa. And I ran across 2 people. One guy was a city councilman, and the lady was a DAR member and also a master researcher named Cynthia Weatherby. And Cynthia asked me a few questions, and I said, "Gee, I don't know much about my family history too much. I can't go back so far, but I do have my great grandfather's death certificate." And I sent it to her because we always had this land in Virginia, and I didn't quite know where we got it from, but we always had it. So I sent her the death certificate, and she sent me a message back saying, "Holy cow!" It was Daniel Epps. She said, "This is an old Virginia name." And she started digging and digging, and next thing I know, she started finding more stuff, and then she invited me over to sign the application, and I met with the Tampa Bay president, a gentleman named Dave, and signed it. Then they sent it to Palm Beach, which is the state headquarters, and they signed off on it. Then they sent it to Louisville, and next thing I know, I was headed to Louisville, and I had to go. I just wanted to see it, and so it just been a real marvelous experience for me. And I guess I'm in the accidental character here in this panel, but really changed my life. I walk a little different, feel a little different, talk a little different, and it's just a different feeling all the way around. And I'm very proud of my ancestor, and this. I guess nothing is an accident, but it's really has made a big impact on me and my family, no question.
So in my case, even though I'd been studying our family history since the late 80s, joining the SRR wasn't on my radar until 2019. So my cousin Stephanie Miller had been collaborating with another cousin, Gerald Scott, and me on our shared ancestry for about 5 years at that point. So we started in 2014. Stephanie made the breakthrough and was accepted into the DAR at that point in 2019. So I decided to piggyback off her application and join the SAR in 2020. And then my cousin Gerald joined in 2020 as well. So to answer your question, it is important to me that this significant piece of family history, American history, which was lost in our case, not be lost again. We should recognize and celebrate our ancestors' contributions to the founding of America. It's really important for people who look like me, like us, be seen embracing true patriotism, not some pseudo historically inaccurate narrative. Some people who would say to people who look like us to go back to where you came from need to be reminded that some of us were here helping this nation get started before some of their immigrant ancestors arrived in North America. So in a way, it's my attempt to help reclaim this history.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I'm going to ask the next question, and this one is going to go to you, Bill, directly. So I'm reading your book entitled A Black Man's Journey to the Sons of the American Revolution and Along the Way and from what I can tell, certainly done a lot, and you've seen a lot in your career and in your life. Specifically in chapter 9, Sons of the American Revolution is the name of the chapter. You talk about your journey to becoming a member of the SAR on July 4th, 2016. Since that time, you've uncovered these additional Revolutionary War patriots in your ancestral line. You were able to find these links to these other Patriots. Can you explain, one, how you were able to do that? Because to me, it was hard enough to find the first one. So you found like all, what, 16 other after that. And then you've also suggested to your family, you should join the SAR or the DAR. I've done the same thing and I got only a handful, but it seemed like you got quite a bit in your family to also follow suit. And can you explain how you were able to convince them to actually join?
Well, before I get to that, we talk about the 6 degrees of separation that, you go far, you meet someone. I'm going to ask Dean to put up that book that I referenced why I got into it in the first place. That's my family history book, and Dean has it. Okay. And you see how thick it is. And I, got into the DNA to try to validate a lot of the oral history in that book. My first patriot, my 5th great grandfather, William Parks, was shot, killed, scalped by Indians collaborating with the British in Powell's Valley, Virginia. And he had left the fort, Martin's Crossing, he was a farmer, and to do some agriculture related, and he never returned. And some of the people went looking for him, and they found him with a war club in his head. So he was identified as a defender of the frontier. That was his patriotic service. I owe to John Sinks the motivation. He's a wizard in finding people. And so we worked along together, and he helped me to identify an additional 14, including one woman. And I said, well, I can do this without John. So I went to a different line, and I identified 2 additional patriots on my grandmother's side. And it actually went through my 2nd great grandfather. His name was Harvey Reynolds. And he was born on August 15th, 1828 as a slave. Now, I use slave and not enslaved because they didn't know anything about being enslaved. They were property. They were slaves. And subsequently was able to prove through documentation that the slave owner was in fact his father. And there's an official document to that effect. So then backtracking, I was able to find 2 additional patriots, from the Reynolds clan. I tell people that, I might be related to Kunta Kinte, and they say, well, how do you even do that? And I said, think about when he was brought to this country, he was purchased by the tobacco growing Reynolds. And there is some possibility in our history, and I think it's in the book that Dean mentioned, that of some possible relationship. So I take it, I own it, and I'll run with it.
How about that? Well, thank you for sharing that, Bill. It's something that I need to do myself is get my supplemental Patriot lined up. Actually, I found one on my paternal side. So I'm in the DAR through my maternal side. I just found one on the paternal side that I just got to go and get that one done now. So I'm sure there's more out there too, but I'm starting slow, so that'll be 2 for me. But hey, got to start somewhere.
I didn't fully answer your question. Of course, it's taken about 2 years for DAR to do supplemental, so good luck.
Yeah.
When I was inducted in 2016, I piggybacked my grandson, who was, I think, 15 at the time. So he became, a member when I was inducted. And I have now, with DAR, my sister, my niece, my daughter, my granddaughter, and the other granddaughter is CAR.
Okay.
And as I was mentioning to Dean, a cousin in Philadelphia, who's now SAR, a couple more in Ohio. So I tried to make it a family thing. I didn't have to encourage them to do anything. I told them I will do the applications. All you have to do is sign, and I will pay, for it. So everybody
Okay.
jumped on board. It was easy.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I think I got like after me three of them, and one of them happens to be my grandmother, who is 100 years old. So I think she's actually the oldest living African American DAR member. So yeah, it was really exciting to get her in. Yeah, for those who are listening who are part of the SAR or even the DAR, I strongly encourage you to keep digging. I mean, this is our thing, right? We like genealogy, we like family history research, so it's likely you probably have some other patriots out there if you just dig a little deeper. So speaking of patriots, and anybody can answer this question. Um, can you tell us a little bit about your Patriot? I think you shared a little bit, Bill, about yours, Mr. Parks, and you got a whole bunch more too. I know you can talk about, but their background, where did they come from? Their ethnicity, and I think we kind of talked a little bit about being the first African American Patriot that was under Rick. For someone to get into the DAR, his mom, and their position in the war, and I guess how you're connected to him. It seems like in many cases it's like a fifth great grandfather or something like that. But I'd be willing to hear, from each of you, kind of to give me a little information about your Patriot.
I'll go next. I have one. My sole identified Patriot ancestor is my fourth great grandfather, James Dew. It's been spelled D-U-E or D-E-W. He's listed in the free DAR publication, Forgotten Patriots, African American and American Indian Patriots in the Revolutionary War, on page 462, as African American and Negro. He was born in 1758, and he enlisted in the 5th Maryland Continental Regiment as a soldier out of Queen Anne's County, Maryland, in the spring of 1778 at the age of 20. We don't know who his parents were, but we have a couple of leads that we're working on. I'm connected to him through my mother's paternal line, the Pritchetts of Eastern Shore, Maryland. Samuel Pritchett, my third great grandfather, married one of James Dew's daughters, Serena. So although James never rose above the rank of private, his service is notable in my opinion. So he first enlisted for 9 months out of Queen Anne's. Then he re-enlisted for 3 years, during which time he was a prisoner of war for 10 months. Then he re-enlisted again, and he served until the end of the Revolutionary War in 1783, so for a total of 5 years. He even fought in the final battle, the war at Yorktown. For his service, he was awarded a pension, number S34771, so you can Google and find it. He indicated in his pension application statement that he served under Colonel William Richardson and Captain John Hawkins in Maryland. And although he died intestate without a widow or heirs, his 4 children petitioned the court, and they were legally recognized as his natural born children, and therefore entitled to his estate. This crucial piece of information was critical in proving the final link to my Patriot ancestor. We speculate that the white woman housekeeper in his household was probably the children's mother, possibly unable to marry James because of the color of his skin.
Wow. That's interesting. Anyone else want to take that question?
Well, I don't have my notes in front of me, but my guy was in Virginia. John Evans was the father, and the mother was a white lady by the name of Mary Epps. And the child was born, and sometimes he went by John Evans, sometimes he went by John Epps. It just depends. Then he had a son later on in 1763, and he went by both names, but usually John Epps. And so back then, I guess, from what I read, if the mother was free, the child was free. So he comes out a free man of color, and then he has a son, and that son is the one that enlisted in the militia. And he fought in Cowpens, he fought in Guilford Forest, and he also was at Yorktown. But he got sick a couple times. He went home and kind of recuperated. Then he went back into the war. He received his pension in Person County, which is where both my parents were born. And once he received the pension, it's funny, there's a group of people, and he was, mixed race, not as much as his father, but all the Epps in Person County, because I went to school in Person County. I was one of the first to integrate the high school there. And the Epps children that were there at the school, I had no idea I was related to them at the time, but they were all basically pretty much going for Indian.
Really?
Yeah. So it's almost like we start off with this mulatto guy, and then he has a son, and then his son is in the war, and then his children kept marrying different kind of people, I guess. And by the time it got fifth generation down the line, and I ran into some of these kids at school, they were basically, at that point, Native Americans.
Wow. That's rather interesting. Wow.
For me, I'm sorry, Charles. I'm Calvin.
Oh, I'm done. I'm done.
Okay. For me, much like my mother, we first entered under Caesar Russell, and we found Caesar Russell to be a very interesting person. He was enslaved in Massachusetts. He became a servant under Lieutenant Colonel North, who was part of George Washington's military. And he was stationed up in West Point, New York, under General Baron von Steuben. Another ancestor, my mother's maiden name is Conwell, depending on the generation. Her ancestor started with George Washington in New York and served the entire time with General Washington. So he was at Valley Forge, he was at Trenton, he was in all of the battles, and he ended his military service at Yorktown. I have another ancestor who was 10 years old. He lied on his application, said that he was 11, became a drummer boy, which is highly unusual for him to survive because they were the very first ones to be killed.
Right.
Because it was the beat of the drum that the soldiers would march to. And it was his daughter it was his son who married Caesar Russell's daughter, who intermarried into the Grandison family. And Cuffy Grandison, who's the book that I'm having come out shortly, was from Scituate, Massachusetts. He knew all of the key officials there in Scituate who became major leaders in the state of Massachusetts, but also Supreme Court Justice Cushing. And Cuffy served on the lines in Boston. His two sons, who I also descend from one of them, were part of the Battle of Saratoga. They were in the rear guard that received all of the acclaim for winning the war. They were in most of the battles in upper state New York and Vermont. They were captured for 18 months and were prisoners of war. So they're very historic, and that's the book I have coming out. So I've got a whole list of men who were in very important battles and were named in some of those battles for their heroic activities. So most fortunate. And I think it's their blood that runs through my veins. And that's why I'm committed, as I am, much like Dean, to tell the story of who our ancestors were, to make sure that everyone understands that our people were here since 1619, built the country, served the country patriotically, and their DNA runs in our veins strongly.
Absolutely.
I'd like to make another little observation. We know it, but the first person believed to have been killed in the Revolutionary War or Revolutionary period was a person of color. His name was Crispus Attucks. And I believe the year was 1770. Don't quote me on that. And Rick was talking about relatives working with George Washington. There are some reporting that anywhere from 15 to 20% of George Washington's Continental Army were people of color. Some were free, some were slaves who joined to get their freedom. And unfortunately, George Washington did not live up to the promise that he made once the war was over.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very important thing that should be noted. And Bill, I'm glad you raised it. In 1983, there was a lawsuit, and from that lawsuit came the book Forgotten Patriots. And in that book, there are 6,500 men of color, indigenous and African American men, as printed by DAR. And most accounts today still use that number of 6,500 men of African descent who served in the Revolutionary War. We now know that that number is substantially higher, closer to 15 to 20,000.
Wow.
And we know that because of people like us who were joining these lineage societies.
Yeah.
And we're now bringing forward our ancestors that no one knew they were people of color.
No.
And as Bill indicated, we're 15 to 20% of the men who served in General Washington's army. That number holds true because as we're finding these men, we're finding them in the pension records, the land records. So we're finding all these men and coming forward to showing that in all of these major battles, not just the battles of George Washington, but all these major battles, close to 20% of the men were of color. And we should have known that because after the Revolutionary War, the French, who were allies and helped us win the war, said they helped us win the war, but so didn't the African men. And from their firsthand accounts, that 15 to 20% of the battlefields were men of color. Now that's been long forgotten, and now we're bringing that history back. That our independence was built on the back of 20% of the men. And let me also add that, as Bill mentioned, George Washington, when George Washington was commander, he initially didn't want men of color. But then he allowed men of color to come in and said, if you serve 1 year, I will give you freedom. And he did that because the average European only served for 3 months. He then put a caveat on that, and he says, if you serve 1 year, and if you serve 3 years, I'll give you bounty land. And you heard Calvin mention that he didn't know how his family received that land. Most families in the South whose families have large tracts of land receive that land as bounty land from their ancestors serving in the Revolutionary War for 3 years. So that's why we were so prominent in those battles.
Oh, wow. That is such good information. I can promise you they never taught me that in any of my history books. So I thank you, and I hope people are listening. I hope you got your children listening. If you're not, you replay this for your kids. See, this is the kind of stuff that we just don't know. And that's why we have these shows, because this is the information that needs to get out there so that people know the truth. Because the truth has been so suppressed over the centuries that, but as the Bible says, what is done in the dark will be brought into the light. So, hey, I'm glad. And I'm so glad you guys are here to share these stories. Let's move on to
my ancestor received 278 acres of land, through the land grant.
That's a lot.
Sure, that's a lot of land, even by today's.
Give me some of it. I know what you mean. Our family has land down in Macon, Georgia. Same kind of deal, came from the Revolutionary War, and it's still in the family to this day.
Good.
So, Dean, question for you. You started Family Pearl LLC, an organization focused on African American genealogy. Please tell us more about this organization, how it helps Black people find their family history and do their family history research.
Sure. So when I was planning to retire from the investment company Vanguard in a corporate life of 40 years, I decided that I wanted to do something that I love to do, genealogy research. My plan was to offer genealogy-related services to everybody, but to specialize in African American research since this is much of what I was doing already. So I began consulting through my local chapter of the Association of Professional Genealogists, providing 1-hour consultations to clients of all backgrounds. And I quickly learned that there was a lot that I didn't know, especially for those African-American clients that had already traced their families back past the traditional brick wall of 1870. I continue to consult independently in the business world at the same time specializing in cybersecurity. And as a result, my family Pearl genealogy business has not grown. The pandemic has impacted this to some degree also. I do still take clients, but with the advent of Ancestry.com and other new technologies, many easy projects don't require my services. As an example, I had someone contact me for a project not long ago, and I was prepared to send a proposal with the contract. And however, as we spoke, and here's that 7 degrees or 6 degrees of separation, I realized that I knew where his family was from and that the information was easily accessible. So I just told him how to tie into it.
Oh, okay.
I had a white author contact me about how to research an African American in her soon to be published book, and I'll help her track that person down. I've helped some clients install genealogy software in their computer, create online family trees on Ancestry.com, and interpret their DNA results. So I'm expecting to have a partner join me to help with my project backlog soon. My originally planned sweet spot is building and maintaining family tree files for people without the expertise or time to research on their own. So in the interim, much of my activity has been focused on lectures, panel discussions like this and the like.
Awesome. Wow. I could have used you some years ago when I had ran into a brick wall for about 20 years, in fact, and finally broke through it. And it was kind of through DNA, actually, is how I actually broke through it. And that's a long story, but wow. I mean,
May I share another DNA?
Yeah, sure.
I have assisted 5 individuals who were within my family, had DNA matches, and they were all adoptees. One in particular, we had a second cousin match something, and she told me we're trading emails that you're going to help me, find my, I don't know who I am. I don't know when I was born, where I was born, blah, 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 blah. And you're going to help me find them. And I said to myself, this woman is nuts. Huh? Well, I later found out she was a comedian from Las Vegas, but she had been searching for 35 years for her birth parents.
Wow.
I found them. And took about, 6 months or so, but found them. And she's now written a book on her journey to, and of course I had the opportunity of writing the foreword in her book because, I was helping her, was able to do that. A second person, she had been searching for many, many years, and subsequently I put her on track to meet her family, and she also has published a book on her journey. So it's like I said, it's just kind of a sidebar that I had the skills from the homicide stuff, knowing how to get into the weeds to help people who are adopted to, and of course during that time the adoption records were closed. You could not get to them.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's incredible. Beautiful.
It's incredible. I know I had a couple of cousins like that reached out to me like, we have a match, and all these years I might have thought I was with this family, but now I'm finding out, and you kind of unravel it. You find out locations of where they were, and wow, okay, I think I know who your parents are. So it's really interesting. And again, I think everyone, especially African Americans, should take that test, because you'll find out that you have connections with people you didn't even realize you had connections with once you start getting that DNA results, and then putting that into the JED match and all of that, which then explodes into some other areas. But we can have a whole nother session on that, just the DNA, because it is so powerful, and it doesn't lie, as you know. Coming from that detective background, one thing is true, that DNA will not lie.
Well, one other application, not trying to take over the show, but I have Cameroonian DNA, and I met someone, and one thing led to another, and I was inducted or invited into the local Cameroonian family. BFU is Bowie Foundation, Bowie Family Union, and this also occurred in 2016. Well, our national convention is in a few weeks here in Washington, D.C., and I was asked to co-chair the committee putting this event on. And I resisted. I said, look, I can't speak the language. I don't know all the customers. All of the customs. And they call me Shay. Shay is somewhat of a title, Prince of the Palace, da, 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 da. You're going to do this. We sold out the hotel within 48 hours, the Hilton up in Rockville, and we're expecting over 500 people. And there is no party like a BFU party. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But once again, it was a result of DNA that, I was segued into, this other community.
Wow, that's amazing. I had a listing of questions. I'm gonna go right to Rick because I want to make sure. I know you've got some other special engagements in a few moments here, so I want to make sure I get a question out to you. You have an extensive background in researching American history. We kind of talked about that a little bit, and just growing up, we get taught what we're taught. We get the books that they give us, and they give us a specialized story about American history, a even smaller curated story about Blacks in American, history. And we hear about the same, Harriet Tubman and this one and that one, right? And that's about it. But I have to imagine that in your research and having this specialty in American history that you've uncovered some pretty incredible things. And if you could just share one of those, like, whoa, I didn't even know. I mean, you just gave us one, but like, do you have another one out there that would just probably blow our minds if we only knew?
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, there is a perception that there are only one or two heroes from the African American community. We hear of the Harriet Tubmans, the Sojourner Truths. We hear about the Frederick Douglasses. And I don't think we really understand the importance of our own history and whether our people were free, freed, or enslaved. There are so many remarkable stories out there. And as I crisscross the country and I do a lot of research across the country for some of the books that I write, I can't even begin to explain when I open up some of those archives, some of those colonial records, the documentation that you find in those records and the importance of those individuals. So I would rather not talk about those individuals in my family. I would rather talk about those individuals in other families where we find that, a mother hid her children so that they could escape north. And I found that kind of record in the documentation. Or a mother who had an interracial child and try to hide that information so the child wouldn't be taken away from her. And once they found the child, that's what they did in the pain and agony that she went through. So there are so many remarkable stories that are out there. And when you listen to the men on this panel this evening talking about, their freed, and enslaved ancestors, there are just so many remarkable stories that we really have to begin to really have our people understand the importance of doing their genealogical research, the importance of going back to your elders in your family and hearing those oral stories and trying to document those oral stories, because if not, those stories will be lost forever. So that's really the key takeaway, that there is no one individual story that's more important than the others. We just have so much rich history in our families. And again, we've been here since 1619. We've been here for 400 years. And as Bill indicated, Crispus Attucks was the first man, but certainly as important as he was a man of color. He was a runaway enslaved man who was the first to die for American democracy on March 5th, 1770. So, I mean, that kind of story, when you think about it, that he stood for the very principles that everybody else stands on, whether they realize it or not.
Mm-hmm. Here, here. Wow, I think we could write our own history book, really. I mean, if you just get a few folks together, I mean, the panel right here alone probably can fill up a whole textbook of things that they've uncovered. It's absolutely amazing. And, the oral reports from family members, followed by you can back that up with some documentation down the line, which I did. My grandmother talked about all kinds of stuff down in Macon, and when I went down there, I couldn't sleep. It was like so fascinating and enlightening, and I was learning so much, and it was just like, wow, the tragedies, the triumphs, and everything in between. It was just like, this all happened, and they kind of were like, more, yeah, that was just their life, right? But to me, it's like, no, this is a big deal. This needs to be told. We can't sit still. And so I pulled together some family members in Detroit in a conference room at a hotel, and spent, I don't know, 2 3 hours just going over PowerPoint slides, because that's what we do in corporate. Because I took my corporate life and brought it to the family, and I said, look, you're gonna sit down and I'm gonna feed you and everything, but you got to hear this story. And I just went through each person, and they were just like, I thought they would get bored after a while. There was no one bored. It was so interesting.
I like to
And
So
the
ask a quick,
reason,
I like to ask a
and
quick question, if you don't mind. You
sure.
know, I know when we talk about this, and I'm still new, with all of this, some people eyes glass over when I start talking about this. Like they really don't want to hear it after 2 or 3 minutes. Uh, and I think some African Americans are, I wouldn't say they're offended by it, or they are, uh, uh, I think if I wasn't in the groups that I'm in, that I may be the same way. It's almost like if you don't know your past, you don't know your history, or you don't know just a little bit of it, it's almost like when someone brings it up that they do know theirs and they're also African American, it's almost like, they may feel like you're rubbing it in, or they may feel like you know something that they don't know, and it may make them actually feel worse in some
Mm,
ways. And I'm getting some of that even from family members, because most people I talk with in their families, there's only like one or two that's really interested in it. And that's white or black. I'm hearing that, but I think some African American people I've spoken with about digging deeper into their history, it's almost like they are afraid what they may find or may not find. So it's almost and I'm new at this, so and I'd like to know what you guys and lady think about, what I just said.
well, Calvin, one of the things that I've found, and you're absolutely right, our history has been a painful history. And the laws that were written in this country were written in such a fashion that made it a painful history. Um, and I think, and this is one of the things, if you've ever listened to me at any of these panels, I always talk about when we lose Black boys in school. And I always, particularly when I go to European audiences, I always ask them, why do we lose Black boys at a certain age, and what age is that? And they can't tell us. And I tell them it's the 4th and 5th grade, depending on what state they live. And if we don't lose them in the 4th and 5th grade, we lose them in the 6th or 7th grade, again, depending on what state they live in. And what happens in the 4th grade is the introduction of slavery. And from a very early age, we're taught that slavery is something that's wrong. And our young Black boys, consciously or subconsciously, the first picture they always see in those history books is Black men and bare-breasted women in chains. And it's reinforced when they get to junior high and again in high school. And subconsciously, for an awful lot of people, that's what they see their lives and the lives of their ancestors as being in chains. And it's important that we begin to correct that, because our ancestors speak to us. And those of us who are on this journey, we go places and our ancestors tell us to pick up this book because you'll find me. Pick up that book, you'll find my history. So it's really important that we begin to change the negative connotation of his story, history. And it's
right.
important that we begin to develop our own history,
Or a
make
story.
sure that the other people understand how important our history is in terms of the American history. So I understand exactly what you're talking about. It's painful, it's hurtful. So many families have been divided intentionally. So many families have been separated. I mean, when you realize only 370,000 Africans came to the English shores, United States of America, um, between 1619 and 1805, but between 1805 and 1860, 1.5 million enslaved people were sold south. Families were divided and separated, and that pain is felt by many families even today. So it's important that we begin to change the national narrative. It's important that we begin to correct history, and it's important that we begin to show our own family and those that we come in contact with the importance that our ancestors, freed, enslaved, were into building this nation.
Absolutely.
Very good. Thank
I
you.
agree. I agree, Calvin. A lot of people in my family do have their eyes glassed over look when we go into it. But one interesting development I'd point out is ever since Gerald and Stephanie and I got accepted into the Sons and Daughters of the American Revolution, Gerald started a Facebook page, and we're starting to find Pritchetts from all over Maryland and Delaware that are fascinated, and they're joining more and more. And I bet there's a lot of them watching here today. And it's partly like a virtual family reunion we started to have. And I think it's a way of getting family back together. And I think as they're hearing these stories, they're getting more interested and the eyes aren't glassing over as much, my opinion.
Right.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bill, you want to say something?
No, I agree with Rick wholeheartedly. And I think that when I put my book together, and it only took me about 4 months to do the manuscript because I had documentation, going all the way back to high school, and really came in handy. But we need to encourage more people to document their history, because 100 years from now, they want to look back. Well, what did we do? What contributions did we make? And what challenges, did we have? So, and I know a lot of people are afraid of trying to write, but I just think it's something that we need to do.
Absolutely.
One of the things I want to, it's interesting how the four of us piggyback on one another. And based on what Bill just said, that's one of the main reasons why we started a group of us, the Society of the First African Families of English America. We felt it was very important for a number of reasons to have a specific society that honors our ancestors who were freed, and enslaved. We felt it was very important to have a society where we as descendants can promote our ancestors' contributions to this great nation. And we also are building out a database. So for these millions and millions of people who don't know that they descend from these most distinguished ancestors, whether they were free, whether they were freed, or whether they were enslaved, it's important that we know who they are, where they came from, how they got here, and their importance. And to be able to belong to a lineage society where you can connect with your long lost relatives. I mean, we get folks who are connecting who go back 8 and 9 generations, didn't even know they were related. And I have people call me cousin all the time because they find out that we're related to one another, and they're actually finding out how we're related to one another. So what a remarkable feat that is. So anyone who's a member of DAR or SAR, if you descend from a person who is of African descent, you're automatically eligible to join. For those of you who know that you descend from someone prior to March 5th, 1770, which was the assassination of Crispus Attucks, you're eligible to join. And if you don't think you're eligible to join, we'll have a database coming out shortly that will have these historic names, the places where they lived, and how we're related. And we see people coming forward all the time submitting their applications, and we're going to be building out those databases because we're all connected and related. And come from Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, or anywhere in the deep South, when they're taking those DNA tests, they're finding out that they are in fact related to people going back 5, 6, 7, 8 generations in North Carolina and Virginia, which means that their people were divided and sold south.
Absolutely. Exciting stuff, exciting stuff. I got another question. This one is for Calvin. Um, you produced the theatrical drama The Green Book, which later became an Academy Award winning film. I love that movie. I haven't seen the play. If it's going to circulate anywhere up here north, I'd love to go see it. But for those who don't know about the Green Book, because I know some people said I hadn't seen that, and I told them you got to go see it then. But it's a story about Dr. Don Shirley, who is a world-class African American pianist who recruits a bouncer from Italian American neighborhood in the Bronx to be his driver and his bouncer. Despite their differences, the two men forged this unexpected relationship while confronting racism and danger in the Deep South during this segregation era. So, Calvin, being at the forefront of this story on stage, please explain to us the importance of having a green book. I hadn't talked about that here because I'd like you to
Yeah.
explain that what that is, and during, especially during this era, and how did it feel to see your stage production extend from the stage onto the silver screen?
Well, my play was a bit different from the movie. My play dealt mostly with the people that started the Green Book, Victor Green and his wife Elma. Elma was from Richmond, Virginia, and her hero growing up was Maggie Walker, who started the first black bank, in Richmond. And her husband was Victor Hugo Green. He was a mailman. They lived in Harlem, and his mail route was over in Hackensack, New Jersey. So he would go over there every day, deliver the mail, come back and work at the kitchen table on his Green Book. And so he would take his wife down to Virginia, during the summer vacation. Then he saw how difficult it was with travel. And so my play deals with really the interworkings of the Green Book and how these mailmen who could not belong to the AFL or the CIO started their own union in the postal system, the National Association of Postal and Federal Employees, that is still there today. Maynard Jackson, the former mayor of Atlanta, his grandfather was one of the original starters of this union in Lookout Mountain, Tennessee in 1913. And also talk about Black women, because there were no phone numbers in the Green Book, just addresses. So you'd drive up someone's house 2 or 3 in the morning, knock on the door, and you'll go in, because the mailmen on these routes would screen who they could, possibly have a good match with someone traveling. And so the Black woman was really the backbone of the Green Book, the Black homemaker, because back then, the Green Book started in 1936. Back then, a lot of women were still working in the home. And so they were the backbone. And these letter carriers, who the neighborhood people trusted. And just like today, most of the letter carriers know more about the neighborhood than anyone else in the community. They know who's doing what, who's getting some kind of mail, and whatnot. So, and which how homes were saved. So my book deals with the beauty of our people helping one another during this period. It wasn't AAA. It was this man who just took it on himself, along with his wife. And Alma ran the Green Book with 3 Black women in her office and 1 white woman. And a Jewish firm published the Green Book, printed it every year. So I also show how people work together from different religions, different races, to make this thing happen. And one of the biggest advertisers in the Green Book was Standard Oil.
Oh, really?
Standard Oil had a program, Esso. Wynton Marsalis' grandfather, Ellis Marsalis Sr., had a Esso station down in Louisiana, down in New Orleans, and he was head of the Black Hotel Association owners back in the day, African American or Negro back in the day, what it's called. And so throughout the country, Black people kind of knew, just like a lot of Blacks supported the Dodgers, a lot of Black people supported Standard Oil. And so an Esso, now Exxon Mobil. So my play deals with that, how just one guy with 8th grade education made a difference, and that difference fell through the cracks of history for a long time. Way before Ebony or Essence, there was this Green Book. For 31 years, he put it out. And his dream was one day to go out of business once the Civil Rights Acts were passed. He died in 1960. He didn't live long enough to see it, but his wife kept it going until 66. And so and just like what Rick was talking about, there are hundreds of stories about people doing things like this. And this guy was not part of the Harlem Renaissance. He was there, but he wasn't hanging out with Dr. Du Bois. He was just a working guy. But he made a difference, and people still talking about it, and so it's so my play dealt more with that than the movie version, but we touched on some of the same things.
No, that's equally as interesting because the book. I mean, the movie goes right into this book already has been established, right?
Right.
And they're utilizing the book as he goes through segregated South, but the origin of the book is equally as interesting I didn't even know that was what the scope of the play was. So, I mean, I would definitely love to see that because I love the history. I love history. So the origin and the onset of how this all came to be, to me, is equally as important as the utilization of that book throughout the South. So thank you very much.
Let me tell you this note added note. And people said, why would Standard Oil be so much involved? Why would Standard Oil be so involved in this Green Book project? And I say it goes right back to the guy that started Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller. His wife was from an abolitionist family from Massachusetts that went out west to, back then, Ohio was kind of like, the Western Reserve. And so her last name was Spelman. So she's from a family abolitionist. So the school in Atlanta is named after her family. You go on Spelman's campus, you'll see a big portrait of her father, who was a congregational minister. The church on campus is called Sister Chapel. And I thought it was called Sister Chapel because all the sisters were there, but really it's called Sister Chapel because of Laura and Lucy Spelman. And so it just shows how different groups work together. Just like we had the Jewish printer, we had the blacks working together, and then you had the industrialists pitching in as well. So it was kind of like they built bridges, just like we're talking about our ancestors. Our ancestors worked and served with people, fought with people, served under people, served over people, and so we're a melting pot, and we're all mixed with all kind of things, and but so the American story is tragic, it's sad in a lot of ways, but we also got to balance it out with talking about the good part too.
Absolutely. Well, I know that a couple of our panelists may have some commitments coming up, so feel free to drop off at any time. For those that can stay on, I did have at least one more question that I wanted to ask, and it was really around how you've been, I would say, using this membership or having this status in the SAR. Has it opened up doors and opportunities for you that you feel that you may not have had had you not joined this organization? Which really is leading into why would an African American man want to even consider joining?
Well, I think I have opened up doors in the mindset of other people.
Okay.
I don't know whether you knew this, but I'm also a hypnotist by training. I used to do the investigative hypnosis for the Metropolitan Police Department. So I understand the idea or the concept of waking suggestions, grabbing people's attention. And when I go to these conferences, I'm normally the only person of color there. And while we may be dressed in black tie, my waistcoat and tie is Bamente. It's Cameroonian. So people will come up and ask the question, what is that? Mm-hmm. And they belong to me then, and to start off, they said, well, can you tell me a little something about your Patriot? Yeah. My second great grandfather was shot, killed, and scalped by the Indians working for the British in May of 1776, and they found him with a war club in his head. Wow, they belong to me. So I know that the organization probably did not seek us out during the earlier years when Gene mentioned the possibility of joining SAR. I said, well, the only thing I know about these legacy organizations is what DAR did to Marian Anderson in 1932, prevented her from singing in Constitution Hall. And she says, well, it really didn't happen that way. Oh, so, I was educated, and the fact that and Jean, I should say, her family were slave owners. And we got past that quickly. It is what it is. All of my patriots, all 17 of them are white. Just about all of them were slave owners. And it raises another question. Some of them are patriots because they paid taxes, they provided food and other things, to the military. Well, when you go to the 1782 tax roll, it has columns, and it would ask you how much land you own, how many horses and cows, and they also have a column, slaves. Now, if they're providing the food, who's growing that food? It's not the owner.
That's right.
So should they be recognized as the ones who tilled the soil and fed the chickens and all the other agricultural animals, so that the slave owner could be recognized as a patriot? That's what the next book is going to be about.
I can't wait.
Well, like I said, it raises some interesting, questions. But I have found that when I go to these events, I am educating more about me, what I've done, what we as people of color have done. And surprisingly, a lot of people are very receptive to that.
That's good.
And so that's a good thing.
That is very good.
So, Michelle, what do you go through when you tell people that you're in the DAR? I mean, what kind of reaction do you get?
Well, it's funny. When I first joined, I was super duper excited, and I remember going to work, and I think our boss, we were in staff meeting, and I'm being an executive and sitting around the table and being the only Black at that time too. He says, okay, so everybody goes around. I said, well, I joined the DAR this past weekend. He looked at me like, did I hear that right? Did she say DAR? I could see it on his face. He was shocked. He said, really? Well, how did that happen? And I started telling him about my fifth great grandfather and this. He was floored. Okay. And I was in Illinois at the time, and I became the first African American in my chapter in Illinois. So, but I can tell you though, my chapter well received me and was ecstatic to have me. And they told me, oh, your application was the most complicated one ever that they've ever done. And I can believe that, because mine was very maternal. So there were name changes and marriages and all of those things that you have to prove, right? As everything that they ask for, you've got to have a document to go with it. So it was quite challenging, but it went through and it was approved. And I think the temperature in our chapter was very warm. I was actually over a committee when I first joined, and it was called the Women in American History. And so I would give an update on different women of color, like something that they may not have known. And then I started doing this trivia question, giving them more like a prize if they won. So I would bring these prizes in, and the ladies would be so open and ready to win these prizes. So it was really an education opportunity too, just to learn more about African Americans and their contribution again to America. And I remember them. Actually, our state regent came into one of our meetings, and she was just so fascinated in what we were doing and how we had this trivia game and how everybody was into it. And I ended up getting an award for it that year. And it wasn't like I was trying to get an award. I just did it because I thought it would be fun. Like, let's make this portion of the meeting fun and let's give away some prizes and learn something at the same time. But I can tell you, they've been the best set of women that I've ever embraced as sisters. They were older than me. It did not matter. They were very inclusive of me. And even to this day, although I live in a whole different state, I still am a member of that chapter. I pay my dues and I go on the online meetings. Now that with COVID, we are able to do that. And it's just, I can't let them go. I can't let them go because, they treated me like a sister and haven't let up, even with me having left Illinois over 6 years ago, or wow, now 7.
Yeah, I think that's true with myself as well. I met some really wonderful guys, in this SAR, and most of these guys are white, and
Mhm.
I just feel a real fellowship, friendship, and and they have shared with me, and they really want to see this country move ahead and do some things that maybe hadn't been done that well in the past, but they really want to hold it together, and some of these guys have been quite passionate about that.
Mhm.
It was quite surprising to me when I first to see how much they would carry, not just about their own people, but really for everyone,
Yeah.
and I think that's the story that people don't realize. And like you saying about the women that you ran across, there are some beautiful souls
Mhm.
throughout, these groups that, may not be getting a fair shake, just by, the history and other things. But I find it's very uplifting, and I think we have to do more to bring. But Bill is doing his part. He's bringing people in like gangbusters. I mean,
I
he's
think I
champion of
know.
this. He's like the recruiter. So he
Well,
can write a book about that.
yeah, I'm sponsoring a young man now, 17. He had his pilot's license at 16,
Mm.
and I met him through his mother and grandmother, who were inducted into DAR in January. And so I had his application done in a week, and we're waiting, hoping it will be approved. But the interesting thing is his Patriot, I think it's his 6th great grandfather, Luke Valentine, is a free person of color from Bedford County, Virginia.
Mm.
And that aspect also was attractive because all of my my family roots are from Bedford County, Virginia. So I was kidding around with the mother. You think we might be related? But I think the other thing, echoing what Calvin was saying, within probably 6-7 months, I was asked to by the president, I want to put you on the board of management. And I said, well, whoa, wait a minute. Aren't you moving me a little fast? I'm still trying to. And I asked him point blank. I said, well, is this because of the color of my skin? I said, no. We think that you have skills that will be advantageous to your organization. I said, oh, okay. And then I asked the next question, well, how many people like me are in the organization? He says, I don't know. It's not a demographic that we capture on the application. Did you have to put that on your? I said, okay. So roll up the sleeves, and within a short period of time, less than a year, I was asked to head up the press committee. And I said, well, I'll do it, but I will have to, I want to change the name to the Public Information Officer. I do not want to be known as Press Secretary Spicer. Well, within 2 weeks, I had the organization on national news. You may recall that a congressman was shot in June of 2017 at a ball field in Washington, D.C., and
Right.
these two Capitol Police officers came to his aid, and they killed, the gunman. So I was asked, well, you think we can give them an award? And I said, well, maybe 3-4 months down the road after everybody else. Well, come to find out, my neighbor is a Capitol Police captain, and one thing led to another, so I was able to get, we were the first to give them awards within 2 weeks. And the media jumped on it because it was their first opportunity to get soundbite from one of the officers or special agent. And as I explained to him, he's not going to answer any questions. Anytime a police officer kills someone, they are a homicide suspect until such time as a grand jury, rules it justified. Well, I can be a ham sometime. While we're giving the presentation, I hear in the background the rotors of this helicopter. I said, this is too good to be true. As it got closer, it was loud. And I said, hold on a minute. I made arrangements for the president to do a flyover while we're giving you the award. And and then they said, well, Bill, what are you going to do next year to top this? But once again, I did something that they had never even seen or heard. How did he do this?
Right.
So there's this mystique, and so on several occasions I've had the media come out and cover one of our events because it's different. And so.
Well, I saw you on I think it was on YouTube. It was an old clip from a couple of decades ago where you were talking about, gun control back then.
Yep.
And it's just amazing how even back then, how it's the same conversation that you were having, I don't know, what was 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it's still the same thing. So yeah, I've seen you out there. You know a lot of people. And I mean, reading your book, you've done a lot, especially around, homicides and, detective work and just basically trying to keep that our District of Columbia safe. And so I applaud you and Calvin, you with your the plays and the writings and the art and all of that. It's just so fascinating. And of course, Dean and Rick are gone here, but they got other commitments. I think they're in the same meeting, in fact. But hey, when you're popular like that, people keep you going, and they got you on demand. So it was actually an honor to be able to get you all at least for 1 hour, all in at the same time, because we were trying to juggle, figure out what day was going to work and everything. So I'm so glad, and I'm so glad that.
I want to say one thing to Bill real quick before he's going down to Savannah, and I may be going down there. I'm not sure, but there's a statue in Savannah of these Haitian fighters who fought with the colonists against the British. And it's right over there near Black Church, one of the oldest churches in America. And these statues, maybe there's 6 Haitian guys, and the youngest guy is the drummer. He may be 10 years old. His name is Christo. And this guy ends up being the president of Haiti down the road. Many years later. So his statue is there. When you go to Savannah, you can't miss it. And every year, I think in October, the Haitian people have a celebration of their participating in the American Revolution. Even though, the colonists lost that battle, just like they lost the battle in Charleston, but they still celebrate it, and the Haitian community really makes a big deal out of it. And they haven't really gotten their due either for helping out, in the war. But the people in Miami come up, and so it's kind of a big deal. And so you get down that bill in Savannah, you won't have no trouble finding that statue.
All right. I'll keep it in mind.
Okay. All right.
All right. Well, I think I looked on the chat here. I'm going to look again real quick. I don't think there were any questions. There were a lot of great comments, which you all can read on the pages directly after the show. But everyone seemed to really, really enjoy tonight's show. So thank you again. If I give you all 30 seconds just to do a wrap up and closing to say something, we can take a moment to do that now if you like.
Well, I've enjoyed the opportunity. I've enjoyed the dialogue with my compatriots, and willing to do it again. It's a very interesting, format, and you'd be surprised at the offers that will come up. I've already been contacted by a bishop at the Church of Latter-day Saints, I think it is. And they put on this annual program, Root Text, I think it's called. And as I understand, their viewership for the last conference was somewhere between 5 and 8 million, viewers.
Wow.
So I've already been interviewed for next year. And so once again, just an opportunity to share my experience with, moving to the Sons of the American Revolution and other things that I've done with the DNA. And by the way, I have autosomal DNA matches with reported descendants of just about all of my patriots.
Wow.
And you can't use it, because it is autosomal, but it just tends to validate, the various, relationships.
Absolutely.
Okay. I like to say that I'm writing a play on Marian Anderson. Everyone knows about her being denied, denied performing at the Constitution Hall. We've seen that story. We heard it many, many times, and it's still there. But what they don't know is that she actually did sing at Constitution Hall 4 times. So I'm going to do a play about her singing in Constitution Hall.
Okay.
Because I think we got to tell both sides of the story. We just can't keep just beating the same dead horse, because she actually did perform. So I think that's something that will balance this out a little bit and at least give it, a full accounting of her participating, and DAR, reaching out to her to bring her in. So I think we need to just have both sides of the story.
Perfect.
And it was my understanding that the denial was actually the manager who was, I guess, running Constitution Hall as opposed to DAR. At least that's the story that's told, but I'm sure Calvin's going to get to the truth and let it all come out. I'll be looking forward to hearing about it.
Yeah. And Michelle, thanks so much for doing this, and keep doing what you're doing. And this was really an honor to meet you and meet Bill again. And my first time meeting Rick and Dean. So it really was, I'm still new at this, and this is just a wonderful fraternity, and I'm meeting great people, no doubt.
Absolutely. Well, there you have it, everyone in SMAC Nation watching today. Another excellent show that ran over like they all do. I'm sorry about that. I'd like to definitely thank our panel tonight, Bill Ritchie, Calvin Ramsey Sr. We also had Rick Murphy and Dean Henry on today, and of course, everyone out there in SMAC Nation. And if you haven't joined SMAC Productions, please do so on Facebook and on YouTube. And if you came in late and you need to watch the replay, or you are figuring out like, okay, I'm starting to watch it, you can do it at the same place at Facebook and YouTube at the links that were provided in whatever communication that was sent out to you. And so with that, we're going to close our show for the night. And thank you. And everyone have a blessed evening. Good night.
You
Good
too.
night. Thank
Good night.
you.